Hello and welcome to our event on Discover the Most Secure Server in the Industry. Today's webinar is sponsored by Hewlett Packard Enterprise and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech and I am excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. I want to go through four things here. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. A Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, but if it doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to get started with HPE. Also in there are a few Actual Tech Media resources like the Gorilla Guide Book Club and our events calendar. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Third, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Now, fourth and finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. So after the event is over, we'll look at all the questions that came in, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. So with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today. We have Jamie Bintliff, who's North American Category Manager for Intel ProLiant Platforms at HPE. So Jamie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning to everybody who's joined the call today. By way of introduction, my name is Jamie Bintliff. I am the Hewlett Packard Enterprise ProLiant Category Manager here in North America. So really what we're going to go through today is a little bit of information of why HPE and why it's beneficial to you and your organization moving forward. As we go through today's slides, realize that we do have some information that might be a little bit forward-looking. We don't want to necessarily share that with everybody out there, so understand that we do have CDA involved here. And then lastly, as I mentioned, some forward-looking statements. So we've talked to many of our customers, and we really try to look at what challenges they're facing on a regular basis. And we've really boiled these down to some key points. Performance is a high touch point for our customers as we look today. Can my systems perform? Can they meet the needs of my environment? And can they carry the workload requirements that my business needs? We also look at capability overall, okay? My business demands are growing, my data center demands might be shrinking or growing, and my staffing demands may be changing. How do we address some of these things? And then we talk about things like sustainability. How does sustainability affect your business day to day? How does it affect your IT business? We try to see what the sustainability metrics and levers that can be pulled to benefit not only your corporation and business, but the environment and the sustainability goals of your region or area. Then manageability. How do we manage our systems? How do we make it easier? With so many disparate opportunities to manage different components, different workloads, different applications, we really need to try to find a way to boil things down to an easier process. Because the more complicated it is, the less repeatable it is, and the more difficult it is to maintain staff that can actually accomplish the goals that you need. And then lastly, but not least, we have to talk about security. Security is the most important thing every customer needs to be concerned with, and HPE understands that. We look at the risk profile of our customers out there today, and we have to help them mitigate that and target where the security risks may be and try to avoid them at all costs. So what does our family look like? We're Hewlett Packard Enterprise. We are a hardware company at core. So this is an example of what we call our ProLiant server family. On the left-hand side of the slide, what you've got are our tower systems, And they come in a couple of different versions, our ML110 and ML350. And as we work our way across the slide, you start to see our rack-mounted compute systems, ranging from our one-socket 1U all the way up to our 2U four-socket systems. And then on the far right, we have a bladed portfolio as well. So looking at this entire family, you can start to see what the options are. You can look at AMD and Intel processors. And actually, if you even look to the far right, you can see that we're offering an Ampere system, that is our RL300, allowing you to do a very different type of compute. Many cloud service providers and many of the high touch systems out there are leveraging things like the RL300. So it's a very capable platform, and it's a variation from what you would see in your typical x86 space. So the goal here for is you to understand we have a variety of platforms handling a variety of workloads. You can pick and direct whichever platform you'd like to target for your workload and figure out what would be the most efficient and best for you. Now, as I mentioned, both AMD and Intel are available, as well as the Ampere processor on the RL300, but you've got that flexibility. Now, if we look at how do you choose, we'll break this down into a couple of different buckets. If you happen to be an AMD customer today, we can look at 4 different models: the DL325, the DL345, the DL365, or the DL385. Each of these gives you different capabilities and options. But if we really start at the top left with the DL325, that's a single socket, single U box with a very high core count. And what that allows you to do is treat it like a Swiss Army knife. It will do many, many things. And then if I needed to do more than what it's capable of, I may look at a different box, whether it's the 365 or 385, if perchance I needed more compute or potentially more overall I/O capability. So this is where we try to offer options and capabilities in this Gen 11 line. Now, when we look at the Intel side of the house, it's a larger slide. There's a larger portfolio here, but very similar in process. If we start at the top left, we have our DL320, again, single socket, single U. And then as we progress around the clock, clockwise, you'll see the enhancements to the systems, whether it's CPU capability, whether it is GPU capability, or memory expansion, or just overall physical expansion within the box. We've got a lot of options moving forward. So choosing a platform is where you would start when you decide where your workload needs to be. So what has the industry done? I mean, that's all well and good. HPE has our latest Gen 11 systems out there, which you just saw, but where's the industry? How did we get to where we are? On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the 3 different processor manufacturers I mentioned, Ampere, AMD, and Intel, all releasing new processors within the past 18 months. We've integrated all of those in our systems. With those new processors, we've brought other technologies to bear. DDR5 is now the standard for memory in the industry. It's a speed enhancement and bandwidth enhancement over DDR4. And the entry-level capabilities of DDR5 are just the beginning. We expect it to expand and grow its capabilities and bandwidth over the next decade. Additionally, speed on the backplane of our systems has increased. We've gone from PCIe Gen 4 to PCIe Gen 5, effectively doubling the backplane capabilities and the bandwidth capabilities on that PCI subset. We've also brought in NVMe 5 for connection to the new, latest and greatest NVMe capable drives. So all of these components, those are industry-based components. A lot of people have done them. HPE has as well. So we're staying right at the forefront of what's available out there in the industry. But if you look to the right-hand side of the slide, this is where we get a little more unique. As I mentioned earlier, security is a huge focus for HPE. And we continue that with our latest ILO, which is our integrated lights out chip on all of our ProLiant systems. ILO 6 leads the industry for security. And stop, full information right there. So we continue to drive forward with a security message because your systems have to be secure. They have to be safe from outside influences and even sometimes inside influences. We've taken the ability to look at how systems are cooled. With the latest and greatest processors from both Intel and AMD, you're seeing higher wattage requirements, higher TDP numbers. So how do we deal with that in tomorrow's data center? How do we give you that performance without having to bring in things like liquid cooling to the rack or to the row? HPE has integrated and invented a smart liquid cooling module that is a closed loop system. If you're familiar with PC gaming, you've probably seen these closed loop systems before, and we found a way to integrate that technology into our servers where necessary. We've also looked at power requirements across the entire platform and said, okay, there are some certain requirements that are happening both in the US, outside the US. We need to start to meet these power standards because we do sell our servers worldwide. And we can gain from those benefits no matter what region the servers are sold in, because the power supplies are higher efficiency, providing more power, as I mentioned, to these new processors that actually consume more. So we are not sitting with our hands down, waiting for things to happen. We're innovating, moving forward, and adding on to things that the industry does. So why HPE? Why ProLiant? Why Gen 11? Those three things for us, we consider to be our winning hand. Now, if you notice, you've got that royal flush there. We're going to talk about each of those components in that royal flush. First being performance, then we talk about data center capacity, the overall sustainability, the manageability, and security. Now, I save security for last, but that is probably the most important thing. But since we're going to go through the cards, that is our ace. So let's start with that 10. Okay, what is that? Let's talk performance. In today's world, we know people talk about workloads. We talk about workloads all of the time. But what does that workload actually have to run on? The hardware does matter. So HPE hardware provides you all of the things I mentioned before, the latest and greatest processors from AMD and Intel, the latest and greatest memory capability, and all of the other components that they bring along. But we've also got that legacy of hardware capability, of hardware engineering, hardware support that we continue to carry through every ProLiant generation, ranging from generation 1 all the way up to now to generation 11. So that performance does make a difference here for us. Now, how does that performance translate to the next component, capacity? Because capacity is hand in hand with performance capabilities. If I can have a better performance system, I can theoretically have fewer in my data center. So what I look at is a cost reduction by having fewer systems, and that cost reduction extends out to more than just the physical systems themselves. When we start to compare legacy systems, which you see here on the far left of the slide, that's an example of a processor that was available in 2019. And you can still buy it today. But if you were to build a 300 core virtualization farm with approximately 5 terabytes of memory, you would need 20 of those 2-socket systems to meet those numbers. If we fast forward to today, which are all of the systems to the right of that left-hand slide, you start to see the difference in density and cost to meet those same performance requirements. So if we pivoted to something like the DL320 that I mentioned earlier, that single socket, single use system, I can hit that 300 core and 5 terabyte number with just 9 physical systems versus 20 in the legacy version. So that's wonderful. That's great. I have less in my physical rack. But what else does that buy me? Well, I have fewer ports that I have to plug Ethernet or fiber channel into. I have fewer uplinks for my power requirements. So we start to see that ripple effect within the data center. And if I look at the cost, it is about half of the cost of what we would have paid for the previous generation. So there is a significant cost savings there as well. And then I'll take your attention to the top of the slide. We look at the power consumption. Power consumption matters in data centers. 10 matters in data centers. 10.8 kW in that legacy configuration to field and fuel those 20 servers. But as I go across and I start to minimize the number of systems, even with the higher performant processors, I'm looking at reducing that power consumption sometimes in half, sometimes even more than half. So it's a great story to say we can be not only more performant with these new systems, but we can start to consolidate and look at our capacity overall. Okay, so these are the benefits we find here. So sustainability, that leads to the next part of the discussion. We talk about sustainability. If you haven't heard about it in your environment, in your corporation, in your IT organization, you soon will, because sustainability carries a message that goes across all silos of IT and business. But how does HPE talk about this? We talk about it in a couple of ways. Energy reduction, which I referenced earlier. Okay, so we can start to see a reduced requirement for power to the systems, packaging, and then even equipment recovery. So here's where we get into the fun math. Okay, this is an interesting dynamic. These are actually studies commissioned outside of HPE, and they're looking at the IT industry as a whole. But a couple of things they found. First and foremost, if you look in virtualized environments, which most everybody have, no matter what hypervisor you've chosen, your CPU utilization is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% on average. Okay, it's not overutilizing the CPU. We have a lot of headroom there in most cases. Now, there may be a customer out there may be a person out there saying, hey, that number's very low. I'm at a 95% CPU utilization level. I worry because if that utilization spikes, we're going to run into a performance issue. But there are some customers who have higher CPU utilization. Overall, industry average, 30%. But the coupled discussion with that is the energy consumption. Today, 40% of your systems that are more than 5 years old, they do about 7% of the work in the data center, but they consume approximately 66% of the power. So mathematically, that's a very bad balance. I have a large number of systems doing very little work, but consuming a large amount of power. From the environmental and sustainability perspective, that's not beneficial. So we need to look at ways to tilt that or switch that seesaw back in the other direction. And that goes back to the slide I showed you earlier with the breakdown of all of the individual racks, the power savings we can accomplish for the same workload. So there are big benefits to migrating to newer systems. Now, the other thing that comes up in these discussions is, well, what about the cloud? Can't we just push everything to the cloud? The cloud will save us. And the cloud definitely has a place, both in the public cloud arena or the private and hybrid cloud arena. But for HPE, we've realized, and the industry has realized, that more than 2/3 of the applications that people use in day-to-day business, they are not optimized for cloud usage. So the 30% or the third that's left over, those potentially have migrated to the cloud because they were relatively easy. The remainder are a little more difficult, so they're going to take a little more time and effort, or they may never migrate to the public cloud at all. They may maintain in an on-prem or a hybrid model or in a co-location facility. So looking at all of these different levers that can be pulled at a given time, you can determine where I can save and where I can steer. I can save in the data center. I can steer towards the best location or platform to make not only my business, but my applications benefit. So a lot of things to think about here in the sustainability world. And now we really get confusing. All right, a lot of things to look at on this slide, but I want to break it down in a very simple way. HPE for Gen 11 has made some changes. First and foremost, we tried to reduce the environmental impact of our systems. Now that extends beyond the physical server itself. This extends to the packaging, okay? We have reduced the plastic that we use in our packaging by about 80% for Gen 11, okay? 80% less plastic involved and a 30% reduction in cardboard and corrugated paper. So what does that mean for our customers? What does that mean for the environment? What does that mean for sustainability? It means there's less to throw away, less to recycle. If you're integrated with a co-location facility and that's where your systems happen to be hosted, you also generally have to get rid of all of that packaging at the loading dock. So that's less to deal with because you're generally not allowed to bring cardboard and plastic onto a co-location floor. So these are things we're trying to think about. How can we reduce the impact? How can we reduce that environmental footprint that's been happening for years and years? And then we look at carbon, okay? Carbon footprint is definitely a hot button. It comes up in discussion with many of our customers. It comes up in discussion daily if you watch the news. So carbon output and carbon footprint, people are measuring now actively. So if we can find energy efficiency, as I mentioned before, I showed you the kilowatt usage in those different racks with the same amount of workload, we have the ability to reduce the carbon footprint overall. And that's really where we want to help take all of our customers. You can decide to reduce that footprint. You can decide to save on the annual report. When you do your filings, you can say we were able to match our carbon footprint or reduce it and identify it clearly. And those are beneficial. Those are things people look at as feathers in their cap when they can save energy, save money, and reduce carbon output. And then we'll look to the far right. Investment capacity. What does that mean? It's a great buzzword. What that means is you can invest in systems, and HPE can help you recycle legacy systems. Now, that recycling process does a couple of things. First, if they have a value in the market, they can be given a second life. So they don't end up in a landfill, they don't end up in a ship, they don't end up at the bottom of the ocean or a pile somewhere. They're given a second life. They're refurbished and put out there for use by other people. So we're recycling the activity. But at the same time, that money can be brought back into the budget. Instead of spending money to recycle equipment, HPE can work with you to buy back that equipment that's legacy and outdated for you as you update to new. So not only are you seeing a offset in the cost because you're gaining something for giving back legacy equipment, but you're also guaranteed the fact that we will show you the proper disposal techniques. We will give you certificates of disposal and erasure. And then lastly, we'll give you the ability to say, hey, I know I did something good because now that system is still in use. So very, very good overall program, that HPE Recycle and Reuse program. I think it's probably not as emphasized as we should do it, but please be aware that it's out there. And that affects the sustainability message for your information and your organization. Oops, sorry, I apologize. I jumped a slide in the wrong direction. Now, manageability. This is the fun one, okay? How do we manage all of these things? Have we gotten an increase in our staffing in the past 3 to 5 years? Likely not. We may have lost many people. With the way the world and the environment has gone, there have been a lot of employment changes. Some people have decided to migrate out of certain workforces and either not continue or pick a different direction and no longer do what they did before. But for us, we have to figure out how to make life easier. As I mentioned earlier, you could have different components and different items from different people, and you have to speak different languages and do different processes. That's not repeatable. The more complicated things are, the more difficult they are to repeat. And when they are not repeatable, they become variable. And variability in IT is something we want to avoid because then it's difficult to manage. So for us, we really do like to focus on our management message. I mentioned the ILO capability, which is our center connection for all of our ProLiant servers that allows you to manage, maintain, and monitor. We talk about something such as our management upstream, things like GreenLake for Compute Ops Manager and HPE OneView. And then how do you scale these? How do you do this work moving forward? So let's talk about our entire management portfolio. On the left-hand side, you see HPE's ILO. ILO is our integrated lights out chip. It sits on every ProLiant server. And this is where we allow you to get in, manage, maintain, and monitor all of our ProLiant systems. It feeds information upstream to our management aggregation software, which I'll talk about in a moment. You can talk to it individually if you need to. You can actually look at it and say, I'd like to look deep into this individual system and its components. So ILO is the gateway to everything else. Proven, tested, consistent. That's what ILO brings you. But then how do you do this at an enterprise or a large scale? Because I may have 10 servers, and that's very easy to look at 10 different ILOs. But what if I have 10,000? How do I start to look at all of them and know what's going on? That's a lot to manage and a lot to maintain. So we do have two different management solutions. Number one, we have HPE OneView, which you see on the bottom of the slide. OneView is our on-prem management solution, and it comes in two different ways. You can provide OneView to your data center in a virtual instance where you just run that virtual instance, it spins up, and it will begin to monitor and manage all of the ILOs within that data center that you identify. The other option is an off-prem management solution. We have a system called HPE GreenLake for Compute Ops Management. What we like to call it internally is COM because it's a lot less to say. But COM is an as-a-service management offering that HPE offers. Okay, it's not OneView because OneView is on premise. COM is hosted by HPE, and it allows us to scale the back end to absorb large numbers of systems. So if you had 10,000, 15,000, 50,000, large numbers of devices, we can start to look at scaling that into COM, giving you the ability from a single screen to manage multiple locations and multiple systems. So if your support organization happens to be outside of where your systems are residing, they can go via the COM interface and see all of those systems. Now, the cool thing about COM is, as I mentioned before, HPE maintains it. So every time you log into the COM interface, you know it's the latest version with the latest capabilities. And that can handle things like firmware updates, driver updates, system alerting for failures or predictive failures. It can also do an automated call home when it sees problems or issues. And then the last thing that it can also do is give you analytics information. It's monitoring and watching your system. So as it's gathering that information, it allows you to look at trends, issues, and concerns that may occur with your systems over time. So again, COM, that's the as-a-service model. OneView is the on-premise model. Now, this is a little more about COM, what it provides. As I mentioned, it's subscription-based. Okay, you actually just buy a subscription. It's an as-a-service model, and it's the same experience every time. Okay, we've got that cloud-like experience. I just put it up, and that tool is visible across my entire environment. It sees all of my systems from Gen 10 all the way through Gen 11, and it will continue as we move down the line with our next generations in the next few years. What does it do for you? I mentioned some of these before. Okay, if I'd like to do server deployment, I can do that via COM. I can do it to individuals or multiple systems at a time. I can look at lifecycle management. Okay, I can look at how many systems I have, what they're doing through the life cycle of their utilization, and where I need to change, maintain, swap out, and understand what may be or not be under warranty. All of this available through COM. I mentioned the analytics. Okay, performance, telemetry, all of that data, pardon me, again, available through COM. Do you have governance? Do we need to talk about compliance, auditing, any kind of user activity? All user-based authentication so we can track who has done what at a time. Monitoring and support, as I mentioned earlier, we've done that, and we have that automated call home capability to allow us to alert you to problems likely before they're seen. Security, I mentioned that earlier. We can have complete security, encryption to do that lifecycle beginning to end, either in a single or multi-tenant environment. And then lastly, the integration. And this is one of the key points of COM. We don't just sit here and say we have our management tool and nothing else can speak to it. We have open APIs that allow us to integrate with other tool sets out there, be it a ticketing software, be it a monitoring software that might be looking at other devices. So those integrations with other tool sets allow us to use our APIs that everybody can also leverage to share information and gather information from other aspects of the environment as necessary. Now there is a bonus. Okay, I mentioned OneView before, and I just mentioned COM. As we move forward, you're going to see some of those OneView capabilities bubbled up to COM. So what it means is our on-prem management solution, which may be focused on our bladed architecture that I mentioned earlier, you can now bubble that up to COM if you'd like to. So you'll have an additional capability for locations that may have an on-prem solution. Maybe you have multiple locations with on-prems, to bubble them up to a single interface that would then allow you to drill down into each of those. So the long-winded answer here is that is HPE for GreenLake for Compute Ops Management OneView Edition. We're going to call that COM for OneView because it's easier to say. But again, you can start to look at rolling up multiple OneView instances to that COM interface. Again, visible via the same cloud-like experience client. And now the best part. This is it. This is the winner, the closer, the place we want to be. This is our ace. Okay, this is our winning card. We talk about security. Okay, HPE has led the industry in security for years. We continue to lead the industry, and we push forward every day to improve on that. First and foremost, we have what's called the Silicon Root of Trust. For those who may not know what that is, okay, it is the fact that HPE is the last hardware vendor out there who makes their own BMC, their own base management chip, and writes their own firmware. We do not source that from anybody else. We create all of that on our own. So by doing that, we've got the ability to know the immutable fingerprint or data set that's on those components. And by knowing that, we're able to see if it varies or changes over time, whether it's a bad actor, whether it's ransomware or malware, and we can very quickly identify that it exists and stop it in its tracks, allowing us to roll backward if necessary. So Silicon Root of Trust is exclusive to HPE. Nobody else does it. So make sure you understand that. It's very, very strong security. Ransomware and malware are things we need to be conscious of all the time in this industry because there are always bad actors out there trying to get in and create havoc or potentially make money. Now, some of the other things on this list, we talked about the ILO earlier, that management interface, and that's built into security, same concept. We have the ability to offer some global supply chain security. So what does that mean? It means we can build systems in a secure facility, in a secure way, manufacture them, package them, sign them, seal them, deliver them to you as a customer, and know that they came from a secure facility with no deviation between that creation or sitting on a shelf somewhere direct from that secure facility to you. Okay? Many agencies feel that that is a need for them. When we look at other things, okay, I'm going to look at the acronym at the bottom, that SPDM. What is SPDM? We live in a world of acronyms. SPDM is our ability to take that Silicon Root of Trust I mentioned earlier, that bubble that we create around our ProLiant servers, and we have the ability to extend that bubble now because SPDM is an actual way that both network controllers and array drive controllers can communicate. So by using an array controller or a NIC that speaks the SPDM paradigm, we can extend that Silicon Root of Trust to those third-party components. So if somebody puts an array controller in that speaks SPDM, we can now verify and validate that. Same thing with a NIC that speaks SPDM. We can verify and validate that. And we can watch for any changes and alert to any changes that may occur to bring those to the attention earlier of the people maintaining those systems. So the faster we know, the faster we can respond, the better the chances of recovery. So all of this is rolled into that security message. Now, when we look at this as a photo, because sometimes pictures are a little easier than words, if we look at that recovery firmware I mentioned earlier, that's part of the ILO. Okay, the UEFI BIOS, it's kind of a weird thing. UEFI and BIOS are two different things, but we tend to put those words together. But we're able to control all of this and monitor all of this, as I mentioned, from the firmware perspective all the way out to some of those SPDM devices. So we're monitoring, maintaining, and managing all of this and securing it in your systems. This is an HPE exclusive thing. Nobody else is doing this to the level that we are, and that can provide you an extra bit of security and understanding as to how your systems can be protected. Now, we talked about security by design overall, okay? A lot of firmware out there, but if you look at what Silicon Root of Trust actually protects, that's a lot of firmware lines, and that's over 2 million HPE servers worldwide. I mentioned the SPDM capability, extending that Silicon Root of Trust through the ILO verification, and I mentioned our supply chain security, okay? 4 different platforms where we can do that worldwide, depending on what location you're at. And then we look at, again, what are all the details here? Okay, we've got that secure supply chain. We've got the Silicon Root of Trust. We can do processor attestation, which means that processor actually makes sure it is in the correct spot using its own crypto. All right, we talked about the firmware that's continually looking at it during runtime. And then lastly, the external devices. Okay, any kind of TPM devices, storage controllers, et cetera, all fully integrated and capable here. And then lastly, if you want to have a snapshot of it, how do we talk to those third-party devices? That would be the PCIe capable systems. Those are the ones that allow us to extend that ILO capability to third-party components. So with all of this, you do see that security message coming back into play. You see where it's important. You see where it's useful. But stepping back from all of it, we talked about value points here. Okay, we talked about performance. We talked about data center capacity. We talked about manageability. We talked about sustainability. And then we talked about security. All of these are incumbent and inherent in our HPE DNA. We bring those to the table in every ProLiant system we design, every one we bring to market, with the goal being to make it easier for our customers to work and feel that their systems are secure. So with that all being said, I do want to thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And if I can answer any questions, we can do that now.
All right, great presentation, Jamie. And before we get into the audience questions here, we do have a poll question up for everybody. It's about what additional information you'd like about the HPE solution. Plenty of options there: data sheet, technical white paper, customer case study, and plenty more. You can check all that you're interested in, so you don't just have to pick one. Okay, so Jamie, you ready for some questions?
I am.
All right, super. So first one we have here is, why is HPE Silicon Root of Trust better than competitors?
Good question. Very good question. So realistically, if we look at what our competitors are doing out there in the marketplace, they are either purchasing their firmware from a firmware vendor, or they're purchasing an FPGA or field programmable gate array for their base management controller. And both of those activities make things inherently less controlled, and it puts them at risk, because if it is a publicly available piece of firmware that is sold to many other companies, then it is not immutable. It is something that can be figured out, it can be cracked, it can be broken, and it can be changed. And then lastly, when we talk about the hardware itself, when you put a FPGA in as your base management controller, by nature, field programmable gate array is not something that's immutable. It is programmable and changeable in the field. So we don't do either of those things. We lead by building our own hardware, writing our own firmware, and that allows us to control it. So that is a differentiator for us in the industry.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Next question here. They're asking, what if I have GPU requirements in my servers?
So GPUs can go into pretty much every ProLiant server in the family. Some are a little more targeted towards it. We have a product called the DL380A, which is a 2-socket system that allows you to put up to 4 double-wide or 8 single-wide GPUs in a 2U space. So very dense GPU capability with a system designed just to do GPU type work, be it inferencing, machine learning, AI as you get farther down that road. But again, while that's a targeted system, we also allow for GPU utilization in every other ProLiant platform out there. So we look at anything from a 1-socket 1U to a 1-socket 2U, 2-socket 1U, 2-socket 2U, et cetera, et cetera. We've got flexibility and modularity in every one of those chassis to allow for addition of GPUs.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Next question here comes from Michael. And I think Michael asked this one fairly early. So you were covering some of the manageability, but the question is, what type of manageability tools does HPE ProLiant offer?
So from the manageability perspective, I think I talked about some of those earlier, one being HPE OneView, which is our on-prem management solution. And that is a one solution to many. So we're looking at up to 5,000 individual components or systems managed by that one on-prem interface. The other option is the as a service model, which is called HPE GreenLake for Compute Ops Manager. We'll call it COM, keeping it low. With that, COM will do multiple systems and allow us to scale the back end, but we'll host it. So every time you log into COM, it's always the latest and greatest and updated, versus the on-prem solution, the customer is responsible for keeping that updated as we release.
Okay, excellent. Next one, does HPE have anything for a Nutanix environment?
We do. We have been partnering with Nutanix for about 6 years now, and we have a line of our DL product that we actually brand as a DX, and that is our Nutanix specific line. We have two socket systems available there, the DL 360, 380, as well as the 365 and 385 that are both Nutanix certified. So they're an orderable component within the HPE portfolio. It's just we separate them because we consider them to be Nutanix specific, but it's the same DNA as all of our other ProLiant platforms.
Okay, excellent. Well, Jamie, it looks like we've run through most of the questions here. If somebody does want to get started with HPE or find out more, what do you recommend?
So first and foremost, obviously you can go to hpe.com and gather information there. But if you work with your current partner or reseller, they're going to be the best conduit to put you in touch with any more detailed technical information or on-site presenters or anything from that perspective. So again, starting with hpe.com, and then from there, talk to your value-routed partner or reseller to go forward with any more information you may need.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for being here today, putting together a really informative presentation, and for your insights here in the Q&A. Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, and I appreciate everybody joining. I saw a lot of people popping up their locations, a lot of East Coasters. I'm on the East Coast as well, so thanks all for being out here today, and I hope everybody reaches out to us and we can bring you some more great information.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, and we do have one more piece of business before we wrap up. That's the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is Brianna Harbin from Virginia. So congratulations to Brianna Harbin. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Hewlett Packard Enterprise again, and also Jamie Bintliff for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.